Did the Detroit Lions massively overpay Jared Goff? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, and includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're here for you 5 days a week on Locked On NFL with daily NFL content. So news, analysis, updates, we have you covered here. Be sure to subscribe and follow along, again, video form and audio form. We have lots to talk about today, particularly with the Detroit Lions. They paid Jared Goff a lot of money. So Matt Dery of Locked On Lions will be joining us to talk about if the Lions overpaid Goff or if they made the right decision. Then in the second part of the show, we'll dive into a segment with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, as we'll be talking about what's going on with Cam Heyward, a little bit of a contract dispute going on. Then finally, Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers will join us. We talk about their pass rush and their signing of Bud Dupree. So any further ado, let's first into our conversation with Matt Dery of Locked On Lions. The Detroit Lions paid Jared Goff, and here to talk about that with me, Matt Dery, the host of Locked On Lions. Matt, we've seen Jared Goff come into Detroit and really turn the team around. The Lions, they've built the roster around him a little bit, but you have to give credit where it's due for Goff. He's played pretty exceptional football, all things considered. Not a lot of people were sold on the idea of him being a franchise guy. He has certainly silenced those doubters, and now the Lions reward him for his play with a huge payday. So let's start with the contract in particular. Can you roll through those details and your thoughts on the deal?
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, this was a no-brainer for the Lions. They had paid Penei Sewell handsomely, made him the highest paid right tackle in the league. They had paid Amon-Ra St. Brown, making him the highest paid wide receiver in the league, giving him $30 million a year, giving Sewell $28 million. So you looked up, and throughout these negotiations lately, you say, all right, is Jared Goff going to get that 5 in front of the number or 4 in front of the number? And I think it finally came to 4 years, $53 million a year with $170 million guaranteed. So only Joe Burrow at $55 million a year is making more than Jared Goff at the quarterback position. Some will balk at that and say, wait a minute, Jared Goff. But look, Kirk Cousins is making $45 million a year. Deshaun Watson is making $45 million a year. Kyler Murray. Those guys haven't won games like Jared Goff. Kevin, Jared Goff came to Detroit and won 2 playoff games in a single season. The Lions hadn't won a multiple playoff games in a single season since 1957. So, there's things he did to have to knock down some serious barricades in this town, and he's done it. And he's popular. He wants to be here. He spends his off season here. He's dedicated to working with younger receivers, older receivers. Doesn't matter. He's working out with guys all the time. And they chant his name at Red Wing games, Pistons games, Tiger games. So you got to keep your quarterback. And that's what they did.
They absolutely did. So you're not, if anybody comes up to you, Matt, and says this was an overpay, you're not about that. You do not believe that was an overpay?
No, I mean, look, the old school in me goes, oh my gosh, these contracts are crazy, right? But I've seen enough NBA contracts. I've seen Max Strus get $20 million a year where people don't even know who that is. People know who Jared Goff is. You've got to pay your quarterback. The alternative would have been, right, play this year out at whatever, $28 million, franchise tag him, go through all that rigmarole. Then you're going to have fans pandering for Hendon Hooker, who they drafted last year, who's a developmental guy at best, and is going to be the backup this year. But Jared Goff has not really had to come out of games, knock on wood, the last 3 years. He's been very healthy. So the man that leads you and has delivered and has made St. Brown better and others, you got to pay him. And look, when Dak's deal is up, when Tua's deal is up, they'll leapfrog Goff. That's just how it goes.
And it is. I think the other part of it, too, is if you don't pay a quarterback essentially what these quarterbacks getting paid, they're going to leave. They're going to go find it elsewhere. In Detroit, they made a commitment to Jared Goff. I think they essentially had to do this, especially with how he's performed with the Lions. But with this contract, Matt, how does that change your expectations for Jared Goff in terms of, does this give him less leeway for mistakes? Obviously, Super Bowl is the goal in Detroit, but does it change any expectations for you in terms of Goff and his play on the field?
No, it doesn't. And he won't change. He's very level-headed. He's very mild-mannered. I don't think this is going to change him at all. This will motivate him even more to get over that hump. Last year, they were 30 minutes away from Super Bowl, and they choked. And it wasn't Goff. Goff threw 2 balls that hit Josh Reynolds in the hands, and that fourth down call was not Jared Goff's fault. They had an empty set, and it was a bad call. They should have kicked the field goal. I'll say one other thing. Look at the division. The division's going to be really good, but the Bears have waited 40 years for their quarterback. They think they have. The Vikings, now that Cousins is gone, is hoping that JJ McCarthy is that guy. And if not, they'll start the year with Sam Darnold. Not having that here. The guy we know is the guy here. And so, yes, the guy preceding him was good in Matthew Stafford, but again, never won a playoff game. Goff won 2 this year. But I think that I don't think Goff will change now that he doubled his salary.
And Detroit went and they added some more playmakers. You can do it in free agency, you can do it in the draft, but their draft class, Matt, I thought they did a decently good job here, especially when you can get Terry Arnold in the 20s. I think that's value for Detroit. Now they traded up to do so, but how did you like what Detroit did draft-wise to build this roster out a little bit?
Oh, I liked it. No question about it. I think anytime you look up and say, all right, what is the room that concerns you the most down in Allen Park where the Lions practice facility is? It's that cornerback room. And yes, they got Carlton Davis for 1 more year in that trade from the Bucs. They feel good about Amik Robertson, who they got in free agency. They're hoping that Emmanuel Mosley comes back. Brian Branch is as good a slot corner, kind of hybrid guy that plays some safety as there is. But they went out and they had 2 guys on their board that they really wanted, and Arnold and Rakestraw, and they got them both. They got Ennis Rakestraw in the second round at 61. They never thought in a million years they would get. So I like that a lot. The Mekhi Wingo in the 6th round was a steal, I thought, at D-line. And watch for this kid, Sione Vaki, in the 4th round. They're going to put all over the field. Might play some safety, might play some running back, will be a special teams ace. But the key is getting those 2 corners. You can never have enough corners. They go from starting last year's NFC Championship game with Cam Sutton and Kendall Vildor to now having, like we said, Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold on the outside. That's pretty good.
Yeah, big upgrade there, 1,000%. But when you talk about the schedule release, Matt, I think it's so impressive. First of all, the NFL has made such an event out of the schedule. A couple of years ago, we weren't even talking about schedule release, and it was okay, they play who they play when they play. But now, important things, bye weeks, home stands, road trips, the whole 9 yards. How do you think Detroit made out in terms of how their schedule fell for them?
Look, you finish in first place, you got to play a first place schedule. So this team having to play Dallas on the road, San Francisco on the road, at Indianapolis is not going to be easy. I like opening with 3 out of 4 at home. I think that helps them. Bye week 5 is very early. You're talking about having to play 13 games in a row without rest. That's tough. That to me is difficult. You got 3 out of the first 4 at home around November with the Thanksgiving last year, and kind of how it was finagled. The Lions, I think, were tired playing the Packers on Thanksgiving Day. That won't happen this year. 3 straight at home with the Bears, Packers, and Bills around Thanksgiving time with the Bears on Thanksgiving. Not bad. 4 out of 5 on the road with Dallas, Minnesota, Green Bay, and Houston is those 4 road games. Difficult. And 5 primetime games. So the Lions are going to be hunted for the first time in decades. People are coming after them. How they respond, I think, will be big. But I think 10-7, Kevin, can win this division, and I think they will.
Yeah, Lions are going to be one of the premier teams in the NFC this year, especially with how they performed in the roster upgrades. But speaking of roster upgrades, Matt, we still got a couple months before the season starts. Are there any other areas you would like to see Detroit address in the next couple of months, maybe with a free agent signing or 2?
I still think they might add a receiver. They lost Josh Reynolds, who I mentioned before, in free agency to Baltimore. So I think that they might still add there, but it's got to be the right fit. They are not going to be signing, and I know we already signed somewhere else, but they weren't going to be signing an Odell Beckham or somebody like that. They don't want to mess with the chemistry in that locker room. They're not going to be signing any type of anybody that doesn't mesh and mix with the culture that they've built under Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. So still think there's a possibility. They like Donovan Peoples-Jones, who they picked up at the deadline last year to maybe step up, and they have a 7th round pick 2 years ago in Antoine Green. They hope one of those two can fill that Reynolds role. Other than that, I think they like where they are. Maybe another edge could be a possibility if there's a June 1 cut. So I would say edge and maybe receiver. But other than that, I think they like where they are roster-wise.
Matt's great. And for more on Matt, check him out over at Locked On Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up with the second part of the show, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers joins us to talk about the Steelers defense, Cam Heyward, and a lot more. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all the time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonuses with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And again, the NFL schedule release out in full swing. So the team I cover, the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to Kansas City in week 1, and they opened up as 2.5-point underdogs. So if you want to bet on that, you can. Also, I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy, and it is painful to talk about this. They lose in 7. The Minnesota Timberwolves. It'll be Timberwolves Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals. So be sure to go over to FanDuel to bet on her. Everything's going to win that series too. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. Thanks so much for making us a part of your day. Let's now talk with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. As Chris is going to be talking about what's going on with Cam Heyward, the Steelers defense, and more. So let's talk with Chris now. The Pittsburgh Steelers gearing up for another 2024 season, and we're slowly getting there with steps along the way, the most recent one being OTAs. Here to talk about that with me, Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers. And Chris, OTAs beginning for Pittsburgh, but notable name who was not there, Mr. Cam Heyward, and he's looking for that new contract. He's finishing up one right now, but as there's been some drama on Steelers social media waves, I know you might be privy to what's going on over there. Can you kind of dive into what's going on with Cam Heyward right now, the contract he's on, and what he's looking for?
Look, Cam Heyward is he's a longtime Steeler. They drafted him way back in 2011s, and he's been a captain for many years. And now he's on the final year of his deal. He'll be 35 years old this year. So, he wants an extension, and he's stated as much on his podcast. He wants a 2 to 3 year extension. And he kind of wants to get this deal done, which everyone kind of gets. Is like, okay, he wants to play more, but he's 35 years old and he's coming off an injury that basically made him lag all last season. He was not at his best term. But I think to Cam Heyward's point, he's saying like, look, last year I got hurt, but I played with the 2 seasons before that. I played 17 games each, and so you can tell injuries aren't a long-standing problem with me. And in each of those 2 17-game seasons, he had 10 plus sacks. So his point is I can still be one of the best interior rushers and interior defenders in the NFL, and I would like to sign a contract for the length. But the question the Steelers have is, does he still have it? If he can get back to even close to double-digit sacks in a season, he's absolutely worth that money. But, age, just the way things work in the NFL, that's the big question. So the thing is, OTAs, they're not that big a deal. Now, Cam Heyward's never missed an OTA in his life before, so this is the first time. But I also think this is going to be very much in line for how the Steelers have handled other extensions if they do an extension here. TJ Watt also held out from OTAs, came to all the mandatory things, and then when he signed. Same for Deontay Johnson, same for Alex Highsmith, same for Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's become a developing pattern for the Steelers, and I think that's kind of what's going to happen here for Cam Heyward. I do think they give him an extension. Right now, he's a $22-ish million cap hit. His salary is around $16 million. I would imagine like part of this deal is going to be to sort of spread some of that money out a little bit, maybe bring down his cap hit this year so they can maybe have more room to make a move if they need to. And then some of the years after, bring it down so he's not as big of a cap hit. But of course, Cam Heyward, he feels like he should still be paid because he feels like he's still one of the best interior defenders, which when you're a top tier guy, you get paid pretty well, which is why he has the contract he has now.
Right, and he's still, when he's healthy, one of the better interior defensive linemen in this league, and which is even more impressive considering the age. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Steelers maneuver this, but as you mentioned, Chris, should probably end in an extension at some point before the season starts. But even if the extension happens, what do you envision his role to be this upcoming year? You mentioned the age factor. He did get injured. I know Keanu Benton came on for them last season. Is there a way for them to limit his snaps so that he can still be as effective as possible? You put that injury risk down and you have maybe other young players take over. Do you still think this is going to be a pretty heavy workload season for Heyward this year?
I do think that they're going to find a way to basically have a stronger rotation this year. You're right about Keanu Benton. He's going to be a big factor because the Steelers, they don't deploy the normal 3-4 as much anymore. A lot of them are 2 down linemen with 2 edge rushers. I think what you'll see is Cam Heyward still being the top guy, and then Keanu Benton will be kind of with him, and then Larry Ogunjobi will be able to rotate with them to give Heyward a breather. They still have Montravius Adams. They still have, guys like Isaiah Loudermilk. They've drafted Logan Lee. They still have DeMarvin Leal. I think they're going to have a rotation of guys to be able to handle it. But I do think the Steelers are in a position where they're going to want to draft another defensive lineman pretty high very soon. I thought it was a potential move for them this year, but they had other needs, and I think that they hit on the important needs for this year. But next year, I think that like we could be going into next season and the Steelers are looking at who are the top defensive tackles in the draft class, because they recognize even if they do sign Heyward to an extension, he's not going to be he's not going to be, destroying people for long, even if he does get back to that level this year. So to answer your question, I think that Cam Heyward's going to still play a considerable amount. Like, he'll still be the starter. He'll play as much as he can, but you will see probably a more consistent rotation because I think they're starting to believe in some of these younger guys behind him.
Now, would you classify defensive line as the Steelers' strongest positional group on defense right now? Where does it slide in with the other groups on the defense?
So, I mean, technically, if you consider edge rusher, yes, but the edge rushing position is the prime position. You got TJ Watt, the best defender in football, Alex Highsmith, who's one of the best edge rushers in football, and then Nick Herbig, who came on really strong last year in his rookie season. That's the group. And if you combine that with the defensive line, yeah, absolutely. That's the bread and butter for the Steelers. So they get it done. But I wouldn't be sleeping on the rest of this team either, because the addition of Patrick Queen has really gotten people excited. We're going to see, how he pairs with the Landon Roberts. They still have Peyton Wilson. They got to see if Cole Holcomb can be back healthy. And they're excited about what Joey Porter Jr. is going to do in his second year. And now with Deshaun Elliott, that freeing up Minkah Fitzpatrick, a little bit more, and a Dante Jackson, in a better time of his career than Patrick Peterson. I think this has a chance to be more complete of a defense than we've seen for the Steelers for some time. And that's saying something because they've been top 10 4 out of the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's still going to be one of the better defenses in this league. There's no question about it. But Chris, and something I've said for a while now is I'm just so impressed with how the NFL has made the schedule release into this huge event. Like a couple of years ago, we were saying, oh, all right, cool, we know when they play now, but they've done everything. The videos drop. So we know bye weeks are a big thing. Road trips, home stands, whatever you want to call it. There are some schedule quirks. And I know for you and I, covering the Ravens and the Steelers, we both have to go, and our teams go play 10 games. That'd be a lot. 3 games in 10 days. That's a big stretch at the same time. How do you think Pittsburgh made out with their schedule?
I do think the 3 games in 10 days is always just a sign. Like, the NFL does not care about the well-being of players because that's just a lot for football. I don't think that anyone should have to go through that in the NFL. And so whether you're the Ravens or the Steelers or whoever, that's ridiculous. I do think the Steelers, like a lot of people are saying, the Steelers are kind of, they got the short end of the stick here because they get but they don't play a division opponent until week 11, and then by week 11 they will play 5 division games out of their next 6 games at that point, and then finish with the Chiefs and the Bengals. So they certainly did not get any favors as far as the outlook from last year. I mean, you look at their last 7 games of the season or 8 games of the season. 8 of those games are 6 of those 8 games are against playoff teams, and the 2 games that aren't are the Bengals. So and that's just because that they were injured last year. So with Joe Burrow, so that is a tough road to haul. But I also think that this is a situation where the Steelers, they do better against divisional opponents historically. I mean, even last year they were 5-1. Even when Joe Burrow was healthy, they went 1-on-1 with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. I think there's actually, Mike Tomlin's talked about this a lot before when we've asked him. He's like, there is the sense of familiarity is something that they're used to and that they appreciate about playing the divisional opponents. They like to kind of get back into things that they want to do there, and they have a better sense of how to counter what opponents do. And granted, the other teams have the same to do against them. I think that's something that's been an advantage of the Steelers. That's why Mike Tomlin has done well against the AFC North opponents over the past few years. So I think playing in Philadelphia is always rough because they haven't won in Philadelphia since like 1965. And then playing the Chiefs is always rough because they haven't beaten them since Patrick Mahomes was drafted. But certainly, I think that the early part of the schedule, they could, if they handle their business, they got in the first 8 games. If they come out of their first 8 games with 6 wins, I think that they put themselves in a prime position to say, hey, we can have some slip ups. They also got to beat the Commanders after their bye week. So 7 out of their first 9 games, if they can win those, they'll give them a cushion to say like, hey, if we go 3-3 in the division, guess what? That right there is already 10 wins. If you steal one from the Eagles or the Chiefs, you're at 11. You're in the playoffs. No questions asked at that point. But if they come out the gate struggling, they're going to have to do some work in the AFC North. And I think that's what's going to be really interesting about their schedule.
Chris is great. And for more, check him out over at Locked On Steelers and right here on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still a ton to get to on Locked On NFL. Coming up, Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers joins us to talk about the Chargers' newest pass rusher. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. There have been plenty of times I've had frustrating ticket buying experiences, especially for NFL games. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. Other times I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there are just no good deals at all. With Killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from receipt, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. Again, the schedule release is crazy. I'll talk about the Ravens again, going to Kansas City for week 1. But they have the Texans on Christmas. They have big rivalry games against the Steelers and the Bengals and the Browns. So those are a bunch of games I'd totally be interested in going to if I'm going to a Ravens game. But there are plenty of other reasons to go on the Gametime app. It's a great experience. And honestly, it's really awesome because they have so many different things over on the Gametime app, such as last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. But again, that app experience is second to none. They have flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. So you guys work out buying tickets with Gametime. Down the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So buy again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off. Down the Gametime app to the last-minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We're back here rounding out Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher is still talking with you on this Monday edition of the show. Again, really appreciative of everybody tuning in, making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe and follow along in video form and in audio form as well. Let's talk with Dan Wade of Locked On Charger. The Chargers got a new pass rusher, and their pass rusher, really big strength of that defense now. Let's talk with Dan now. The Los Angeles Chargers are staying busy, even though we're now in the lull period of the offseason, making moves and improving their roster. Here to talk about that with me is Dan Wade, one of the hosts over at Locked On Chargers. And Dan, we've talked a lot this offseason. The Chargers have been making moves, hiring high-quality coaches and adding some players around Justin Herbert. But on the defensive side of the ball, this is where we're going now because Bud Dupree is now a member of the Los Angeles Chargers, a pretty good rotational veteran pass rusher. You have Khalil Mack, you have Joey Bosa, so it's not like they were hurting for stars or production with everybody healthy, but it doesn't hurt to have the extra depth and some extra pass rushing on that defense.
Yeah, I love the signing, and I think if he had been signed to be a starter, you feel differently about it. I think to get him as their 4th best edge rusher probably on the team right now is awesome. And I think it's especially good because of the insurance it brings you for someone like a Joey Bosa that has really just struggled to stay on the field for most of his career. So to have a veteran, somebody who started as many games in the NFL as Bud Dupree has, I think it's awesome. And honestly, when you're looking at it 1 through 4, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Tuli Tuipulotu, who probably even should have gotten some love as the defensive rookie of the year last year, just was a 2nd-round pick, but already is one of the elite run stoppers at the edge position in the NFL. I think it's the deepest pass rush group in the league. I think for what you're getting, there's better duos. There's better top-end talent out there probably. but go 1 through 4, like find me an edge rusher 4 that's better than Bud Dupree. So I think it's a great move by the Chargers, and another smart move by Joe Ortiz, waiting the draft out, signing some guys after the draft that don't count against the compensatory formula, something he learned in his long time with the Ravens. The man loves comp picks, so he's made a couple of nice moves after the draft to kind of fill some holes on this roster.
Yeah, it was definitely, did not have the comp pick aspect is a huge thing, especially in today's NFL when draft picks are so valuable now.
Right.
But Dan, when you talk about the Chargers defense, I think a lot of people in Los Angeles understood the importance of this offseason and just getting right on that side of the ball, essentially. What is their defensive outlook now compared to where they were at the end of last season, especially with now the help of Bud Dupree in being a rotational guy?
Yeah, I think the nice thing about the Bud Dupree signing, and even before that a little bit, is at least you have something that's really a strength, a true plus on the defensive side, which still has a lot of question marks. So I think when you have a great pass rush, assuming you can get them into good pass rushing situations, obvious passing situations, it's going to be a huge boost for them because they have a lot of questions they need to kind of help and cover up with their pass rush. I mean, a lot of questions in the secondary right now. You have Asante Samuel Jr. and Christian Fulton that are starting on the outside. You have an open position battle at the slot, which is going to have a couple of rookies and a guy in Jasir Taylor who got benched halfway through the season last year. So there's a lot of real question marks on the defensive side of things. I think in the interior of the defensive line, on the outside at corner, in the slot at corner, I think the safety depth behind Alohi Gilman and Derwin James is really questionable. So I think that it's nice to have a definitive strength, something to hang your hat on defensively, and I think a good pass rush can cover up a lot of things. But for the Chargers, they're hoping on a lot of guys having really good injury bounce back luck with a guy like Christian Fulton, a guy like Denzel Perryman, and they're hoping that a lot of young players can come in and make an impact immediately because Junior Colson, the linebacker they drafted in the 3rd round, he probably has to start for you this year. And you have a lot of other guys like that where it's like you're not exactly sure where you're going to get, and you're really hoping for a bounce back. But if those guys do get injured, if they can't get back to the level of play they had before last season, there's still going to be some rough moments for this defense, I think.
And I've said this all show, and I'll say it again right here, Dan, where the schedule release, the NFL has made this into like this massive event where, again, a couple of years ago, we were just like, okay, cool. Like they play here, there, like this time, and they got the prime time. But the NFL's done a good job of marketing the heck out of this thing. And for the Chargers, they obviously, these last couple of seasons, their social media team has done a phenomenal job of releasing their schedule. Now, from a football aspect of things, obviously you get bye weeks and, prime time games. How do you think the Chargers made out?
I think they did well. First of all, the social media team, like if the social media team played for Super Bowl, the Chargers would be like the 49ers or the Steelers or one of those, franchises that has a ton of rings. Unfortunately, they had to play the game on the field, but I thought they killed it just with the release itself. They had back-to-back anime releases that were both excellent, and I think really the best part of their release is just how many layered digs they have in there. I mean, they torched every part of the AFC West and torched a lot of the people that are on their schedule this year, and there's so many Easter eggs in it that it takes you a couple times watching it through to really pick it up. Love the Jim Harbaugh, John Harbaugh pillow fighting in the middle of a bedroom. That was obviously very on brand. As far as the schedule itself, only 3 primetime games, which I've said on my show. I think it's a missed opportunity for the NFL to have Jim Harbaugh only playing 3 primetime games, just because I can't think of another coach right now that has more buzz around him. I really can't. I don't know what coach you could say going into this year is going to be more watched closely, more kind of heavily anticipated on what is he going to do. Can he make the leap again? He's done it once. He took the 49ers to the NFC Championship game his first year after leaving from Stanford. And the other thing is, it's a dude that's known for his kind of post-game antics, right? He has the Jim Schwartz handshake. He has the Pete Carroll super hard pat on the back. And it's like, if I'm the NFL, who doesn't need any help by any means, but if I want somebody to be putting on that headset after a big win in prime time, there's not many coaches on that list, even though he's a weirdo, that I'd rather have on that headset than Jim Harbaugh. So that was a missed opportunity with the primetime games. And the other just big thing, Chargers have another early bye week. They have a bye week in week 5, meaning that, if they make the playoffs, they're playing 13 plus games in a row, which I don't love. And the other thing is just they're not getting a single team coming off of, or they play 6 teams that are going to be playing them off of extra rest. So I think that's another kind of low-key part of the schedule where the Chargers didn't make out extremely well. But overall, I mean, I have a pretty soft beginning of their schedule, and they have a pretty soft end of their schedule, at least how we think of these teams right now, but you just never know.
Dan is great, and for more on Dan, check him out over at the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host, so be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.